Good afternoon, everybody. We're rolling up on the noon hour here real shortly. We'll give it just a couple more minutes, let a few more people get logged on, and then we'll get started. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Stephen Floyd. I am the crop insurance manager for Producer Ag Insurance. And we got Brian Bledsoe with us today. He's going to give us a little bit of insight and answer some questions for us on the upcoming weather pattern here in the short term and maybe even in the long term. So the chat is live and the Q&A is live. So if you have any questions as Brian is doing his presentation here, feel free to throw it into the chat box and we can circle back around and have him address them here in a few minutes. So Brian, I'll go ahead and I'll turn it over to you.
All right, great. Thanks, Stephen, and thank you guys always for having me. A couple of questions that Stephen had sent me at least earlier today that I want to address at least off the bat before we talk about some additional questions, after I go through a lot of the data. But one of those, and I think it's an important one, is the question was, how often do seasonal outlooks bust? And what tends to cause those surprises? And did we see something kind of out of the norm across Kansas? And the straight answer to that is absolutely seasonal outlooks bust. And in fact, I remember looking back, it was actually a year ago at this time. And ironically enough, we're in a very similar situation right now as we were last year at this time, where we're kind of talking about a La Nina episode that's coming on, and we're headed through fall and into winter and whatnot. And I was looking at this last year thinking it has so much to do with how the sea surface temperature anomalies behave across the Pacific Ocean and also the Atlantic Ocean. So while many times we have a good idea about what we think those sea surface temperature anomalies are going to do, they can always buck the trend. So if you fast forward to what I was looking at this spring, we were expecting colder sea surface temperatures and actually what ended up materializing across the northern Pacific Ocean. And if those sea surface temperatures don't end up being colder, a lot of times we don't have to worry about rain. And we don't have to worry about moisture. And in fact, it can actually end up being the exact opposite problem. Instead of having too little in some places, it could actually end up being too much. So yeah, full transparency. And I think, and I spent almost 30 years in television. In conjunction with doing this for farmers and ranchers in the seasonal forecasting aspect. And I always would get aggravated at a lot of the meteorological community because, you see all these weather apps and you see all these things that say it's going to start raining at this time. It's going to rain this amount at this time. And to me, that's just overselling and under-delivering with stuff like that. With seasonal forecasts, my main objective is to not necessarily run the bases of a baseball field, but to just simply get in the ballpark, to use that analogy. So when you're thinking about that kind of thing, these things are always changing, and it's one of the reasons why I enjoy doing these updates on a fairly regular basis, and I send out as much information as I do because I never want to let a forecast sit for too long without having it updated, because obviously those things change. Another question that came in, it says, we've heard of possible colder weather up north. Are you seeing this also? And yes, we did have pretty good cold shot that came through eastern Montana, the western Dakotas. I have some clients in western Nebraska, that actually dropped into the 20s this last Saturday morning and nipped some corn, especially on the outer rows. You told me about the outer 20 to 30 rows. Took a pretty good beating with that. So we were seeing some of that stuff going on. Also, up across parts of, North Dakota in those areas. But in terms of the main corn belt, which is what the follow-up question was, no, we didn't see any frost freeze damage at all that I know of across any part of, eastern Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, or any of those places right there. And I think you would also be seeing a lot more movement in the market if that was the case too, which obviously we haven't. All we've been seeing is just, plan on record yields and, see how that settles. So I wanted to get those two questions addressed, right off the bat. And then, as I said, we'll come back to some other questions here pretty shortly. But first of all, let's talk about what's gone on for the past 30 days. And I grabbed this image this morning for Kansas, and this is where you're seeing the greens and the blues. That's where things have been a lot wetter than average over the past 30 days. And where you're seeing browns and reds, it's been the exact opposite. So some of these areas, and I was just talking to Stephen about this, a couple of days ago, we had this massive complex of storms that really produced as much as 6 to 12 inches of rain, from Tescott back up toward Barnard. Those areas just got smashed with very heavy rainfall. But even outside of those areas, we've had real good rains across parts of south central and southwest Kansas. Even up into the northwest corner, we've seen some stuff. Now, in typical Kansas and Plains fashion, you also have some have-nots in there too. And parts of far north central and northeast Kansas have obviously not been as fortunate as areas farther back to the west and southwest. But I think it stands to reason here that a map that looks like this time of year looks a whole lot better than what we've looked at over the past few years in terms of moisture. And in fact, in many cases, it's caused the exact opposite problem, in delaying the maturing of the crops and too much water in some of the standing fields. Because if you broaden this out across the region, you don't have to go too far to the east here to run into some problems. And these areas here from northwest Iowa through southern Iowa, most of Missouri, Illinois, they have been excessively drier than average for the past 30 days or so. And this is obviously not good news in terms of finishing, although a lot of folks think that the crop has already been made. But I still think that some of this dryness, late season dryness, might take a little bit off the top in terms of finishing and whatnot. Farther to the south, we've had some dry spots in the panhandle, but nothing crazy right now. We have a big lack of a monsoon going on out here across western New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah, and those areas. And I also got a question from a gentleman the other day that said, this monsoon season has really overperformed here across Kansas and eastern Colorado. And you know what? It's had absolutely nothing to do with the monsoon. The moisture that we have been seeing has come right up here from the Gulf of America. It's also been baked out of a lot of the soil here in the middle part of the country that we've been dealing with. So this has not been monsoon related. It's been something that's, come to pass, once you got east of the Continental Divide, and has been a big player there. The next 2 weeks look like this. This is the upper level weather pattern. The way it stands this morning, we've got high pressure here over far west and southwest Texas. We've got low pressure out here on the coast. This is the upper level weather pattern. So it's going like this. Okay, a little ripple of energy coming through here. We've got a little bit of energy here in eastern Canada up around Hudson Bay. This little piece of energy here. So that's what the pattern looks like this morning. Over the next 2 weeks, this is what it's going to do. We've got this piece of energy that kind of kicks through here and comes out of the plains, this weekend. After that, we don't have a whole lot going on. The overall pattern kind of flattens out a little bit, and we don't see anything big coming through in one way, shape, or form. So that's if you need a lot of water, that's probably not going to be the best solution for you. But if you need some heat to finish some things off, I think we are going to see a warmer than average pattern that's materialized here over the past few days, and it's likely going to continue going forward. The other part about this is when the flow is flat like this, okay, you do not have the ability to tap a lot of cold air and bring it southward. You need something that's a lot more amplified. You need to see a lot more ridges and troughs in this pattern. So in terms of early freeze and frost coming to Kansas, I don't see that happening, at least with this pattern. And if anything, as I said, it's going to be the exact opposite. So what we're going to do is kind of break this next 2 week period down into 5-day increments. So this will be from today through the morning of the 15th. This is the forecast precipitation anomalies. And you can see here, anywhere really east of that line, okay, drier than average all the way through here. We've got a little bit of wetter than average conditions out here in Colorado, eastern New Mexico, west Texas, and then generally just average over the next 5 days to maybe even a tick above average in spots. Again, that's today through the 15th. If we look at the temperature anomaly forecast, this is what I was talking about. A lot of warmth here in the middle part of the country. All right. These are temperature anomalies on a daily basis. So we're factoring in nighttime lows as well as daytime highs. So we're looking at numbers here anywhere from 3 to almost 7 degrees above average across Kansas, and warmer than that. Some of these numbers between about 9 and 10 degrees above average across parts of Iowa and northeast Missouri. If we look at the 15th through the 20th, we see a little bit better flow here of some tropical moisture coming up from the south and southwest. So there's a little bit better opportunity to get some rain here from the 15th through the 20th across Nebraska and across a large part of Kansas. That dry signal kind of weakens a little bit and pushes farther east here. If we look at the temperature trend, same story. I still think above average is the way to go from the 15th through the 20th, although some of these anomalies have come back down just a little bit and have been also shoved a little bit farther east across eastern Iowa, northwestern Illinois, and then a little bit cooler than average here back to the southwest with some late season monsoon stuff. If we look at the 20th through the 25th, some of that wet signal starts to shift a little bit farther east here. But no stout dry signal setting up here across most of Kansas during that period of time at all. And the temperature anomalies, again, get knocked back just a little bit. But we are still average to above average, from the 20th right through the 25th, despite some of those higher end anomalies, kind of exiting a little bit farther to the east. During this period of time, there will probably be a cold front or two come through. All right, but they're just not going to have any significant cold air tap coming south from Canada. Canada's been very warm after this latest cold slice that came through last weekend. So it's going to take a little bit of changing the pattern for us to have something, come south that would actually be a threat. All right, so after we get past the next 2 weeks, this is what the state of the Pacific Ocean looks like right now. We still have very warm water here across all of really the North Pacific. We've seen a little bit of cooling here south of the Aleutians, but in general, a lot warmer than average here. And then we also have quite a bit of cooler than average water here. This is with the La Nina situation that's developing here along the equatorial Pacific. So these two things are going to be very incremental in what the next several months have in store for us. And by these two things, I mean the warmth here in the North Central Pacific and this La Nina episode. This is a pattern that's been very similar to us over the past 5 out of the 6 winters. 5 out of the past 6 fall and winter seasons, we've dealt with La Nina conditions. And this fall and winter season is probably not going to be any exception. The one thing that I am really paying close attention to is how strong this La Nina gets and how long it lasts, and also how warm this North Pacific stays, because we have the seasonal change that's going to take place here. And when we get that seasonal change take place, we get storms that come across the North Pacific, and those storms act to churn up the water and actually start to cool it down a little bit. I don't think it's going to cool down enough to completely eradicate this part of it here. So when you have that, you have high pressure that sets up over that warm pool. That diverts the jet stream up like this, and you get something that looks like that. With a La Nina and this cool water off the Baja, you do not get a subtropical jet stream at all to come in here. So with this in mind, you have a highly variable temperature and precipitation pattern usually that takes place with La Nina. And by highly variable, I mean you get a little bit more extremes that take place. You can have real warm days when they're not supposed to be that warm, and real cold days, they take it even, make it even colder than it should be for that period of time. The other thing about that is if we don't have a nice wave train of storms coming in off the Pacific Ocean like that, we have to rely more on storms dropping down from the north. So it sets kind of a battleground from east to west across the state, where the western areas end up being drier and the eastern areas not necessarily wetter. They just have a better chance of seeing more frequent storms. So how these two pieces of the puzzle here behave over the next couple of months are going to loom large in terms of what we're going to see. What you're looking at here is a trade wind forecast from tomorrow right through the 25th. If you look down here on the bottom of the screen, you see the Pacific Ocean. You see these numbers that are here. When we have blues and greens doing this, okay, across the Pacific Ocean, and we have the reds out here, that means these trade winds are still cranking down here across the equator. And what this signature does is it keeps the La Nina episode not only maintained where it is, but inevitably it helps to develop it a little bit further. So what we've seen really since all the way back in early June, this is the Nino 3.4 index, is anything below negative 0.5 is technically La Nina territory. All right. So something right along that line. So really since about mid-July, we've been at that line or below. And you can see here recently, we're right there down to negative 0.8. That's in La Nina territory. Technically, this scenario has to play out for 3 consecutive months for NOAA to classify it as a La Nina. But you could see we never once, even coming out of that last winter and early spring La Nina, we never once popped above the 0 line here. So what that does is it makes it just that much easier for us to kind of be in this La Nina. And you might say, well, this behaved very well for us here in Kansas during the course of this, warm growing season. And you're absolutely right, because the La Nina, for the most part, really wasn't that strong until here recently. We just kind of messed around in neutral territory through the majority of this warm season. And we had the warmer water that was out there in the North Pacific. So that's a pretty good recipe to keep moisture in pretty good shape. And that's exactly how things kind of behaved. Here recently, since we've dropped a little bit lower, I'm a little bit concerned as we go into the fall and winter that we may not be as fortunate with the moistures. You'll see here in just a moment. I grabbed this fresh off the presses today. This is the C3S multi-model forecasting system, and it's looking at that same Nino 3.4 index, okay? So this takes us all the way into spring, and you can see the spread here, okay? When we start, it could go way down here, or it could stay up here. Reality is that it's probably going to skate through and do something about like that. The interesting thing about this trend is that look at the farther we get out here by about late January and February, and you see some of these members up here in positive territory. So historically speaking, when we have a La Nina, it usually maxes out in late fall and early winter, and then it starts to go away mid to late winter, and it's usually gone by springtime. And if we continue to look at this and just take the mean of that, all right, through February, you've got almost equal lines above and below that. But I would say even by late January, you've got more of those lines above that negative 0.5 than below it. So that's all of these models up here agreeing pretty much on the same thing in pulling us out of this La Nina episode by late January and February. And it's very, very critical. I want us out of La Nina by the time we get to March, because if we're not, a lot of times, especially in South Central and Southwest Kansas, that dry signal lingers and it can be a problem for us in March. If you remember what was going on this last March, where we had terrible wind, terrible blowing dirt, all that kind of stuff, that's typical if we have a La Nina that lingers a little bit during that time. So this is going to be something that's very important to watch, just how quickly we pull out of La Nina. And the quicker we pull out of it, the better we're able to capitalize on the seasonal weather pattern changes, and the better off we're able to capitalize on some early season moisture that way. So big player here as far as what's going to happen. I wanted to finish just a little La Nina discussion here, looking at the European seasonal model. It starts in September and it goes through March. And you can see right out here, you can see where that blue is. That's where it maxes out late fall and winter. And then look, as we head into February and March, it goes away. So the European seasonal model is forecasting us to get rid of it. And the interesting thing about that is look right here off the West Coast. You see that little warmer than average blip right there? Historically, when we start to see this warm up and La Nina go away, that bodes well for spring moisture. So I will be watching that very closely as well. But you don't see the warmth here in the North Pacific going away either. So the table is kind of set at that time, if you will, in terms of the sea surface temperatures. If we look at the NMME model, you're going to see something very similar. Okay, La Nina signature right there along the equator. But then again, as we go into the springtime, look at the warmth that also develops right there. So both of these seasonal models are kind of on the same page, which, to be honest with you, a lot of times they're not. But both of these models, which are very important in the seasonal forecast, kind of agree on this La Nina departing by late winter and into spring, and then possibly warming that area of the ocean, which is huge in the springtime. And I'm going to kind of go through that with you in more detail here in just a little bit. This is kind of the weather pattern that is associated with La Nina. I showed that in kind of rough fashion a little bit ago. But whenever you have this blocking high pressure out here like this, you are able to do this cross-polar flow and bring cold air farther south from Siberia and across the Northwest Territories in Canada and dump it down here in the midsection of the country. So when the jet stream stays amplified like this, you're able to do that more effectively. The problem with it being amplified like that, as I said, there's no subtropical jet stream like this. So you put all your eggs in one basket that if you're not in the weather pattern up here where the storm track is, you're going to be drier across this southern tier, and that includes southwest and south central Kansas. And a lot of times the jet stream will just kind of bisect us, really. The northeast part of the state does better, and the southwest part of the state does not with this particular setup. This isn't a full-on forecast for what this upcoming season and seasonal change is going to be because it fluctuates, but in general, this is the type of weather pattern across the country that it can provide for us. If the flow is flatter, then you usually have warmer than average temperatures during the winter, and you usually have less big storms. You usually have less big swings as far as temperature, and you usually don't run such a stark contrast from dry here to wet right there. Okay. So let's look at the Euro seasonal model forecast update here. Let's see what it has to say. This is its forecast for October, November, December. So wherever you're seeing brown, the light brown, and then you got some darker browns here, okay, especially down along the Gulf of America, up here across parts of the Corn Belt. Those are where those higher end dry anomalies are. The dark brown just simply tips the forecast toward drier than average for October, November, December. And you have wetter than average out here along the coast. You also have some, if you see the green down here in the western Gulf and in the Bay of Campeche, there may be some late season tropical stuff down there, but right now, with the way the tropics are situated, there has been no threat at all. And the only reason I bring up the tropics is because if you get the right storm to get under the right pattern, you can do something like that. And right now that pattern is not conducive. I'm not saying that we can't have one. I'm just saying that right now the pattern isn't conducive to that taking place. If we go to November, December, January, this is where you still see that classic La Nina signature where you're drier down here across the southern tier in the mid-Atlantic, and then you are less dry, certainly up here in the Pacific Northwest, Canada, parts of the Corn Belt, but you get a more active storm track doing something like that, okay, for November, December, January. But Kansas, if there's a tip, I would say average to slightly drier than average during that time. If we go to December, Jan, and Feb, this is where your dry corridor is, okay? Something like that. And you see that the farther south central and southwest, you see that little tick toward drier than average right there. That's very typical with La Nina episodes. And some of that dryness can even spill a little bit farther north. But you have wetter than average over the top and wetter than average through here. So that means storms usually come in and max out along the coast and then kind of reorganize farther east, and they kind of get the Mississippi and the Ohio Valley. And to be honest, this would be a very good pattern because the Mississippi Valley right now, they are dry, they are getting drier, and that's taking a toll on the river overall right now. So we definitely would need some moisture there. Jan, Feb, and March, same story. You can kind of see that little tick toward drier than average through that corridor right there. This is really similar to what we saw late winter and spring. You fired things up in eastern Oklahoma and East Texas. It was a lot wetter than average in the Mississippi Valley and points east. And the farther west and southwest you went, you had some issues to get things going, especially over south central and southwest Kansas, all the way back into New Mexico, the Panhandle, West Texas, all those areas. And that's simply because you get more active weather coming over the top like this. And they largely skip things out the farther south and southwest you go. Let's look at the NMME seasonal forecast. You're going to see a lot of the same things here. October, November, December, Anywhere you're seeing the yellow, again, the tip toward drier than average. November, December, January continue to be dry on that southern tier. You still see up here across Kansas some flavor of dryness here across parts of the region. The farther north you go, not so much. December, January, February, we weaken that signature a little bit, okay? But we still see some dryness lingering farther south you go. By the time we get into January and February, late December and January, a lot of times we will see the jet do something like this. All right. And that's when you can really pour some colder air in here. And from some of the weather patterns in these models that I was looking at, I think we do have potential to see some cold in January. All right. I think out of all of the months that I've looked at, January probably has the best opportunity to see cold air come south, which makes sense because January's right there midwinter, so it should be, colder. Jan, Feb, and March, kind of the same story. No tick one way or the other here with the NMME here across Kansas or much of the center part of the country. You got dryness out here. I would really connect the dots, Arizona, New Mexico, right through here. I think that southern area is going to be drier. But keep this in mind. If we see that La Nina go away sooner, by Feb and March and April, that's one of the reasons why there's no tick toward drier here in the midsection of the country, because the model has us out of La Nina by the time we head toward March, and still a little bit of a dry hangover, I think, across the far southern tier. March, April, May, this is way out there, but I just wanted to show it to you. Again, the model has no tick one way or another here. Let's look at the C3S multi-model seasonal forecast update. This is for October, November, December. There's your dryness right there. Anything south. And really where you see some of these darker oranges and browns, that's where the stout signal is. And you can see where the wetter stuff is up here. Pacific Northwest, Northern Rockies, okay? Historically speaking, falls can be drier there in the midsection of the country during a La Nina. So I think that's not out of the realm of possibility, certainly. If we go to November, December, January, same story. You see how that little bulge right there of dryness that kind of comes up like that versus wetter over the top. And December, January, February, that signal still pokes its way up right there across South Central and Southwest Kansas, Eastern New Mexico, West Texas, okay? But look at the wetness here across the southern prairies of Canada, Northern Rockies, Northern Plains. That's very on brand for what happened across Montana and parts of the Pacific Northwest last winter, where they had record snows up across Montana. It wasn't as widespread as this because there were a lot of open winter up across parts of the Dakotas last year where they didn't get covered up with snow. This winter may indeed have more opportunity to be wetter in this sector than what we've seen. So what that does, and you can really see it here, you see the battleground that's created here from the green to the dry. You don't have to go over a very long distance to see that change. And historically speaking, that battleground sets up from the I-80 to the I-70 corridor, right there in the midsection of the country where storms come in. And what you get storms that come in like this. Low pressure sets up a little bit too far north. You get wind and dirt blowing like that, and you get blizzards on the north and northwest side like that. That's a very typical setup during that period of time, but it definitely favors areas farther north with the better moisture, at least for December, January, and February. So let's look at some history here. These are all of the analog years from October to March that are in the package. And by analog, I'm saying years from the past that look like what's going on right now and will likely take place over the next, several months. So it obviously has the La Nina built into the forecast. We obviously have the warm North Pacific, and we average out the precipitation anomalies October to March through this. And you can really see, especially where the reds and the oranges are, the drier than average. And for most of Kansas, during the October to March timeframe, La Nina is not kind. We usually have dry falls with La Nina, dry early parts of winter with La Nina, and it makes it harder to recover here in the springtime when La Nina goes away. That's why I'm saying it's so important for the La Nina to depart before we get into that March timeframe. But this is what history tells us, that we should err on the drier side of things here in the midsection of the country, October to March. And I always say every El Nino is different, every La Nina is different. But when you have a really good sample set here, if you look at this, okay, look at all the recent years here that are in this package. And like I said, that's because the October to March period, 5 out of the past 6 years have been dealing with or will deal with La Nina conditions. So it gives us a pretty good sample set to look at. October to March temperature wise, you can see wherever it's yellow and orange, usually warmer than average. So you might say, what's this business here? Okay. That's because by the time we hit into midwinter, we can get some pretty aggressive cold fronts that drop south along the mountains. So that cold is more reflective across western Kansas into eastern Colorado, western Nebraska, than areas out here a little bit farther to the east. Okay. But that's why you're seeing the white break up the chain here between the yellows and the oranges. All right. This is important because this particular analog set looks at whether the probabilities are higher for La Nina or El Nino going forward. Takes us a long ways out there. All right. So if we start over here, 2025, we go to 2026 and even 2027. The blue bar indicates good probability for La Nina. We're basically there now. Okay. I would expect the September update, because this is the August update, I would expect the blue bars to be higher through here. After that, the thing I'm focusing on, look at the red bars rapidly start to increase here. And El Nino probability is greater than 40% here by May, June, July. And then they continue to max out here late in 26 and into early 27. As I said, I know that's a long ways out there, but the reason I think this is important is because if we're looking to do something for seasonal planning even longer term, and we're looking at history, well, this will be the second consecutive La Nina fall and winter we've had. Historically speaking, after we do that double dip, the atmosphere a lot of times overcorrects and will bring about an El Nino in the spring and summer of that next year. The last time that happened was in late 22 and 23. We went through a fall and winter of 22 in La Nina. Early spring was La Nina, and then we flipped the script and brought about an El Nino during the summer of 23. And that really set apart East and West Kansas. Northeast Kansas was dry and hot as crazy. The western part of the state had a lot of water and a lot of hail during that year of 2023. So I'm not saying that El Nino is definitely on the books upcoming, but when you look at history and you look at what these models are forecasting here, you definitely have to pay attention to it. And even this secondary model has those probabilities lesser, but look at this over here. This particular model initializes for August, September, October. It's got La Nina probabilities down here around 40%. Friends, we're already there. So I think this model solution is a little bit late to the party. And I think it may be late to the party in increasing these El Nino probabilities when we go into 26. These models were late to the party with that transition back in 22 and 23 as well. So this is a big thing that we're going to have to watch in the coming months to see if this is actually going to be on the table for 26 after we see this La Nina depart or not, because it has huge ramifications. Let's look at those. Just using the potential analogs here. The last time we saw that take place, okay, January to April, these are the analogs where we dealt with some sort of a La Nina early in those years. And you see January to April of those years that I listed up here, we were drier right here in the midsection of the country, at least into that time frame. Okay. You were certainly wetter the farther east you went in that corridor. But a lot of this in the west and the southwest owes itself to those dry January and Februarys and early Marches before things got together and actually started to change. Temperature-wise, this is where your cold came down, okay? Very much on brand, especially for January and February. But you were warmer here, colder in the center part of the country. Now let's look what happened in those years, okay? When we say, what about summer El Ninos? What do they bring? And I went back and I looked at the analog since 2000. These were the years: 02, 04, 06, 09, 18, and 23. 23, I really hit on just a little bit ago. But this was the May to August pattern for those years. This area here, okay, was wet. Western Kansas, the panhandles, eastern Colorado, on up into western Nebraska and Wyoming. They were wetter, but you didn't have to go very far to the east. Look at the dryness here, okay? Right up the zipper in the midsection of the country. All of those summers ended up largely being drier than average during El Nino. So if we continue to walk down this road where El Nino looks like it's going to be a thing in 26, and you live in central and eastern Kansas, your summer probably isn't going to be very favorable. And that's not just on a modeling deal. That's on a historical basis here when you go through the core of that warm season. And I bring this up because I think it's an important thing that we have to follow moving forward. Temperature wise, during those years, May to August, we had a lot of warmth in this area. In fact, in 23, it was just a blowtorch. And I know a lot of areas in August and September of 23, it burned up a lot of crops, across parts of Kansas in there too. If you actually had a crop after the spring hail that took place. What about fall and early winter El Nino analog since 2000? Well, you change the pattern completely. Look at all the wetness here in the midsection of the country. And again, that's September to December of those years that I just mentioned. So what you end up doing is you have kind of a split late winter and spring where some get moisture and some don't. You go into the summer season, the eastern 2/3 of Kansas dries out when we have El Ninos. The western part still does okay. And then everything breaks loose here when we go into fall and into winter. And the main reason is during El Ninos, you have a southern branch of the jet stream. So that's what's responsible for all of the wetness that you see here on all of those years that actually took place. And the areas that were wetter than average up here during La Nina dry out. It's just this dance that we do, okay? And temperature-wise, colder than average here because it's wet and you're warmer over the top during those fall and winters. I know that was a lot of information, okay? And so if you've got questions about any of this stuff that you may be thinking about and that I don't address here today in our Q&A session, I want you to reach out to me so we can go over it, because there are a lot of moving parts that are going to take place just from a weather standpoint over the next several months or so. So, Stephen, with that in mind, if you've got questions, we can go to work.
Yeah, awesome. Just kind of to recap here, maybe the next 3 weeks. We got a little bit of a storm system coming through this weekend, Sunday, roughly through Kansas. Other than that, a little bit warmer, a little bit drier to get harvest started here.
I think so.
Okay.
Which is, to be honest, a lot of folks are going to need some dry time. There's some fields that got a lot of water in them still. And we need some heat to finish some things off. So this historical transition, and again, this historical transition into fall dryness really kicks in to high gear in October, November. We're still messing around with kind of the weather pattern that we've been dealing with right now, where we have had more frequent rain chances. But as we project farther out, I think we're going to start to see things be, drying out. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then temperature wise, moving into the winter, I think I remember you said it's going to be a lot of bouncing back and forth, some hotter than average days, some colder than average days, but really pretty level seasonal temperature wise.
Well, yeah. And I could have, I don't usually like to look at the temperature trend with these seasonal models because they have a real hard time seeing cold air. And we all know that there will be periods of cold weather in the wintertime. So if I was the main theme of these computer models from a temperature standpoint, they're all forecasting a warmer than average winter, and even right through spring. But if I was cherry picking a month where we might have some significant cold, it's January. And that's because that cold air builds up, gets time to build up there, and the way the jet stream is situated, it has allowed that cold air to come across the pole from Siberia and can drop right down to the midsection of the country. And Kansas is an interesting deal because Kansas is smack dab in the middle of the country, so you
Yeah.
usually get a battle of the colder that's farther east and the warmer that's farther west. That's why, during a La Nina episode, a lot of times Kansas ends up being the battleground with a lot of these things that come through.
Yeah. Did have a question that kind of piggybacks with what we were just talking about. With as much moisture as we've had here, through the summer and this time frame now, the dryness through the fall, early winter months. I mean, is that going to be pretty harsh on ground moisture, or being warmer, releasing into the spring? Are we going to see a lot more violent spring weather, severe storms, things like that?
Well, a lot of guys are working with a full profile right now,
Yeah.
which I think is fantastic. So my first thing with this, especially during wheat planting season here, is we get that wheat in the ground, we get it up, and then we don't want to go until Thanksgiving without seeing a freeze, because that wheat's going to start going to work on that sub, and it's going to grow, especially if we continue to see warmer than average stuff. That'd be my one concern this fall, is that the wheat's going to get tall. And if you go back, in some of these more frequent years, we've had some issues with that, where the
Yeah.
wheat did get too tall, and then we had freeze damage that was a real problem, or the wheat got too tall, and once it came out of dormancy in March, it ran out of moisture, because it burned up all the sub. So, just looking at past history here, especially recent history, that's the first thing that I have on my mind with this right now.
Right.
And then if we go into spring, in terms of getting moisture, the real key is I want La Nina gone by February. I don't want to screw around and wait until March, because then we kind of have some problems like what we had this last year,
Yeah.
where we were really battling things out with the wind and the dirt. So the La Nina departure is really the key for the spring. If maybe it goes away in January. If it goes away in January and we start making that transition more toward an El Nino type of scenario, you know what? Even better, because if we warm that up during the spring out down there off the west coast of South America, we usually don't have to worry about spring moisture in Kansas. It's summer moisture we have to worry about. That's one of the reasons why I really wanted to walk people through what 26 could end up being if we go to El Nino. Not so many problems on front, but man, you get into the heart of the summertime, and it can be kind of tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So,
Yep.
And just one last question that
Mm-hmm.
was sent in. I mean, do you have any indication? Are we going to see an early frost, do you think? Early freeze, anything like that? Or is it just too hard to guess?
To me, an early frost or a freeze would be a September one. Okay. To me,
Right.
that's because when we get in October, I think at least a frost is on people's minds, at that point. And right now with the weather pattern, I mean, I walked you clear through the 25th, and I don't see anything that's screaming frost. With the way the weather pattern is situated, a lot of times in these falls, and the jet stream will end up being flatter, even a little bit ridgy here and there, and that just is not conducive to bringing early season cold south and giving us an opportunity for a real hard early freeze.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think the kind of the idea behind that question is that our double crop beans got planted a little bit late this year
Mm-hmm. Yep.
because the weather through harvest and whatnot. So maybe a little bit warmer weather into October is actually beneficial for that. So
And historically speaking, that's the case when we look like this. And also from a modeling standpoint, the models are not showing any significant, big plunge of early cold air, at all. That's not to say that we can't have a cold front come through, that is unforeseen. But right now, the pattern does not really owe itself to something like that happening right now.
excellent, excellent.
Yep.
Well, I think that's all we have for right now as far as questions and whatnot. I just want to thank you, Brian, for continuing to work with us and bringing us as much good information as you possibly can. And thank you to everybody who jumped on the call today. I know it's your lunch hour and everything. I appreciate you taking the time out for that. So with no further ado, unless you have anything else, Brian, I think we can go ahead and finish up for today.
The only thing that I will finish up with here, Stephen, is that I never want folks to be afraid to reach out to me if they've got questions. And this is especially true this time of year. There's so many decisions that need to be made, and people are like trying to get stuff done. So if you need something specifically, please don't hesitate to put my phone number or my email to good use.
Gotcha. Your preferred contact on that, would that be email? Is that the easiest way for somebody to reach out?
Either way, my phone's usually on, and I'm answering text messages and calls throughout the course of the day. So if you want to
Awesome.
text or call me, that's fine, or send me an email, whatever you're more comfortable with. But either way, I don't want you sitting there trying to, guess a weather decision and be on the fence. That's what I'm with you guys for. So please use it.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Well, have a great afternoon, everyone, and we will see you next time.
You guys too. Take care.
Thanks.